I have with me here today David and Kay Lorente from the town or city of Renfrew, which is quite a distance from here, northeast of Belleville. And the first question I'm going to put to both of you, why are you here?
Well, we're here to talk about the home children, those children who were sent over to Canada from Britain starting in about 1869.
Well, you spoke a minute ago about a dialogue. I'm going to let you two talk to each other about this now, and I'll let you have the dialogue. Where you go.
Thank you.
We have some crib sheets here that we use more or less to keep us on topic when we talk about home children. My father was a home child. He was born in Cardiff. He was brought up largely in London. He came to this country in February 1914 on the SS Virginian. He was 15 years old. Because he was an adult, he and one other boy were sent over alone. They did not come with a group. But he still was a home child. Dad did not talk of his past. Like most children, even the ones sent to good families, he did not talk. We had four children, he had four children. We knew he was born in Cardiff. We knew the names of two brothers, Arthur and Willie, and the three sisters, Annie, Millie, and Mary. We didn't know anything about our grandparents at all. We were told not to ask, and in those days, kids more or less did what they were told. We didn't ask.
I've known Dave and the Lorente family since we were in grade school. And because my own father was killed before I was born, Mr. Lorente became a sort of father figure to me. Still, I never knew he was a home child, even when I married Dave. It was only in the years after he died in 1965 that we began to piece together his life story and our family history and realized that he was a child migrant. More shocking still, we learned the sad effects of child migration, and that's what we are talking about today.
As I said, I can't remember my father ever mentioning his parents, and it was 15 years after he died that I went to Cardiff, found the birth certificate which he had been denied, which he never got throughout his whole life, and he wrote several times for it. His name had been misspelled in the records, and nobody thought of making a quantum leap of realizing this person with an almost similar name, born on the same day, was the actual child. In any case, that's when I was 51 at the time. I found out that my grandparents were Italian. Now, my father never mentioned that. He always told us that you're Canadian. Be proud that you're Canadian. And if anybody pushes it, you're Welsh descent. And he was born in Cardiff. His brothers and sisters were born in Cardiff, all six of them. But he also, in hiding us, shielding us from the stigma of being descendants of a home child, he was shielding us from the stigma of being WAPs. And by the way, I'm very proud. I was very proud when I found out that my ancestors came from Italy. I was sad that I had taken classes there and had driven by my ancestral home no less than 12 times and didn't know it. Didn't know it. We've been back since. We found cousins over there. It's just one of the things that goes with the little problems that you face when you're a descendant of a home child or are a home child yourself.
We will be telling you of individual home children cases, which, like Mr. Lorente's, are the ones which motivate us to do our work. Our quotes are from actual home children, most of whom we have met or come to know through their writings, or their case histories, or their descendants. So, who were home children?
They were children who were put in what they called homes in England. The homes were, in the beginning, stables, derelict houses that could be taken over by people who were concerned with bringing poor children into them, looking after them. Later on, they were abandoned houses, and eventually philanthropists got into the act of donating manors to the philanthropists, and the children were kept there. There were about 50 agencies in England who were interested in and did send children to Canada. 50. Not just Bernardos. The children were not all Bernardo children. We tell people that not all colas are Cokes. and not all home children are Bernardo children. To be sure, though, 30,000 children sent to Canada were sent by Bernardos. The other 70,000 were sent by the Church of England, the Catholic Church, Sharmans, Macpherson, Rye, Shaftesbury, a whole bunch of other people.
The people who ran these homes in England had an open door policy, but as the poor population kept growing, and there was only so much room in each home, as some moved in, they had to move others out the back door across what they called the Golden Bridge to the colonies and dominions.
So between 1869, when the first home opened in Niagara-on-the-Lake, and the Great Depression in the 1930s, 100,000 children were shipped to Canada. 100,000. The other 50,000 were later on sent to other places, to Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Valparaiso, Natal, Jamaica, and other places.
And they came really as cheap labor for the farmers, who made up about 75% of the voters of Ontario at that time. They went to Quebec and the Maritimes as well, and some went west.
On average, they were 6 to 14 years old. Some were younger, some were older. Many thought they were going on a field trip. Those who made the choice to come to Canada or to go to Australia in the later years had that choice, or the choice of joining the Navy. They didn't have any choice to stay in Britain. And they had been put in the homes for any number of reasons. They were called orphans. 67% were not orphans. 62 out of every 3 were not orphans. My father had 2 living parents. The family, immigrants to Cardiff, fell on bad times in Cardiff. Brothers and sisters of my grandparents moved up to Scotland. My grandfather decided that he would move to relatives. You always move to relatives in London. Things got worse in London, so he moved on to Paris. He left his wife with 6 children. An agency stepped in and took the children away. When my father was dying of a brain tumor in 64, 65, we were told that because of the pressure, we might say something, we might do something that would trigger a response in him whereby he would relive a moment from his past. My mother triggered one. I triggered the other. I went into the room in Ottawa and saw my mother crying in the corner one night, and they were giving Dad a hypo. I said, "What's the matter?" She says, "I did it. I triggered the moment that he was taken from his mother." She said it was sad, and she cried. She said it was like listening to somebody on the phone. You knew what that person was saying, but you could also guess what the other person was saying. And she said it was very, very sad. I triggered the other occasion, and well, that's the story I might tell later.
I'll tell you a little anecdote here about a home child that we've met and come to know very well, Ken Donovan of Ottawa, a veteran of the RCAF Medical Corps, remembering his days at a home in Cardiff, Wales. He says, "At the soccer matches, we boys from the home would carry a blanket through the stands during intermission, while our band marched on the field. People would say, 'Oh, look at the poor orphans,' and throw money into the blanket. When the news got out that some of us had parents, the donations dropped off significantly. I guess orphans are more to be pitied than kids who lost one parent and had to be put in a home while the other parent worked. Maybe there's more romance in being an orphan."
Ken's father was with the military when he was killed, and there were no pensions in those days. There was no free education, no daycare, no unemployment insurance, no welfare checks of any kind, no Medicare. And his mother got a job working in what we call cottage industry. There were poorhouses where you had to do your work all day so that you had a board to sleep on and 2 meals a day. Poorhouses where conditions were kept by law, were kept at sub-poverty level to encourage people to leave. My father and 2 brothers and 2 sisters were in the workhouse for 5 days in 1909. perhaps that's when the last baby was born. Certainly the baby was born that year. When I found that out, when I got 3 different versions of Oliver Twist, which opens with workhouse scenes, and let me tell you, it's a wonderful experience to watch those movies and know that your father or your mother had been in one. Getting back to Ken.
Ken says, my mother got a shilling, about 25 cents, for each pair of pants she sewed. Not enough to keep a family on, and certainly not enough to hire a nanny to look after me. So I was put in a home. My mother paid her share of my upkeep, but she never knew when I was sent to Canada.
It's a little known fact that many home children had their way paid in the homes in Britain by relatives, by parents. It's a little known fact that many of the lists show that many of the children sent over here were non-paupers. They were not poor people. They were sent over by families who thought that perhaps there was a better life over here than there was over there. More hope over here. It's a little known fact that relatives, even parents, were discouraged from visiting their children in the homes, and that when they did meet them, they had to meet them at a gate. And I suppose I should tell the story of what happened to my father there. You want to tell?
You tell the story.
Well, the Army sent me overseas to coach a rifle team in '65. I couldn't go because my father was dying. But he told me he wanted me to go because it was a chance to go and visit 3 different places, 2 churches, and Manor Park. I said, well, I know the names of the churches, but Manor Park, what's Manor Park? He said, Manor Park's where I went to school. This was wonderful. I got leave in England. I did visit Manor Park. He also told me that if I got leave, I could, and went to, I guess we were going to Germany after England. If I got leave in Germany and visited France, and he gave me the address of his sister, I didn't know Sister Annie was alive. I did visit her. I did take pictures, and I asked, how will I recognize this school? It might not be there. He says, well, it's a great big complex. It's got a great big wall about 12 feet high with glass and the mortar at the top to keep the kids in and people out. And it's got a little gate where I used to go and visit my mother. She'd pull a little string that rang a little bell. So I found the place, and you know what? There was a wooden gate. There was a little string and a little bell. And I photographed it from the inside as he would have approached it. When I came back, I had pictures in slides. I took slides because I could project them on the ceiling. He was too weak to sit up. And I had the pictures of his sister and his relatives in Paris, but I started with that particular slide of the little gate where his sister and mother used to come and visit him. And I brought it into focus, and he looked at it and broke into convulsive tears. And the medics came, they sedated him. I was told by the doctor never, ever to bring the subject up again, never to show those pictures again. My father died 2 months later without ever seeing his sister. It's a little known fact that children were sent to Canada without the knowledge or permission of their parents. As one girl said,
There was nobody to wave goodbye.
Dr. Bernardo, and the title is a misnomer because he faked his doctor's certificate, is the most famous philanthropist of the time. He often sent children out of the country under false names and with false credentials so they could not be traced. Like others, he exported them without the parents' knowledge or permission.
Furthermore, parents who put their child into a home for a short period of time often did so in order to get medical attention. There were no clinics, there was no free health care or anything of that nature at the time, but most of these large institutions had some kind of an infirmary where the care of a nurse or doctor was available. But when they would go back in a week or two to get their child, they would be told the child was gone, sent to Canada. No, they couldn't get information as to where the child went. Canada, Australia, whatever. They weren't obliged to turn over the records to the parents, and they didn't do so.
The children were denied the addresses of their parents back home. They were denied the addresses of their siblings even. My father never got the addresses of his parents or his 5 siblings. Phyllis Harrison tells the story in her book, The Home Children.
She talks about the McKean brothers, Alexander and David, aged 6 and 4. They were separated and sent to farms in Manitoba, just a few miles apart, but they didn't know that. One day, however, Alexander, who was then 8, went to the local fair with the farmer. He saw a boy there that looked familiar. He tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Pardon me, I think you're my brother David." But the farmer gave him a quarter to go and celebrate.
And they bought bananas, and they sat on the side of the railway track and talked about what had happened in the last couple of years. They both served overseas with the Canadian forces in World War I. I don't know much about their history after that. The children were denied official papers like birth certificates. My father never got his. Now, how do you go through life without a birth certificate? How do you retire? How do you get married? How do you do anything without official proof that you are who you are? Winnie Larkin of Ottawa wrote back to the agency in England. We found a lot of these quotes in letters that, when we were doing research in England.
"Please send me my birth certificate, as I can't get married without it. And if you know my mother's address, would you drop her a postcard and ask her to write?" By the way, all correspondence that did occur had to be through the agency, which often did not forward it. We've had home children that we've helped to find their records, and they would, when they did get the records, there would be letters from their mother in the file, which they had never seen.
We brought a tape of Tommy Coppinger. Tommy was the lady who looked after him in the home for the aged in Ottawa asked us to find out a little bit about his past. He wanted to know who he was. I faxed Bernardo's. I said, "For Pete's sake, get us the information right away. This man's 103, and he wants to know who he is." We got the records within a week instead of the usual year. Took them down to him. Were able to tell him all about the ships, the names of which he had forgotten, that he had served on the Great Lakes. We found out that the only black mark on his record was that he sometimes used words that should only, as we told him, be used in the Bible. But at the same time, he won more prizes for at Sunday school for quoting the scriptures than any other student in his group. Most important, he got a lock of his mother's hair, and he got 3 letters that she had written to him that were not forwarded. Tommy also found out why he was placed in the home. His father married. When Tommy's mother was a teacher, and she made the mistake of getting married. And in those days, married teachers lost their jobs. So she took a job in a laundry, in the school, in a private school. He was born, and she wanted to keep her job. So she put him in the school. Now she earned £16 a year, and it cost her £13.50 to put him in the school. She was left with £2.50 a year to clothe both of them. She finally signed papers which allowed the agency to send him to, and he came through Marchmont Home. He was 103 years old when he found out his mother loved him. Want to say what happened?
Well, just a few weeks after that, we got a call from this woman who had contacted us initially about Tommy, and she said that Tommy had died. But she said, he told us after that visit he was ready to go, because now he had outlived everybody who ever made fun of him, and he found out his mother loved him, so he was ready to go.
Children were supposed to be sent to school until they were school-leaving age, which was 14, and they weren't paid up until then for the work that they did on the farm. But after 14, they did their work and they got paid. Now, a lot of them were denied the meager wages that they were promised. Some were luckier than others as far as getting an education. Felix Reardon lived on a little crossing just outside of Renfrew.
Felix says, there's a school across the road and I'm making good use of it.
This is what he wrote overseas. He certainly did make good use of his education, because we saw in the records that he was writing letters about his birth certificate, and he wrote to the agency many times over the years, and finally, to no avail, and finally there was a letter written from Ottawa University where he was studying classics, and this is what he said.
By the way, don't bother about my birth certificate. I found it by myself.
As I said, many home children were denied the meager wages that they were supposed to receive when their work term or so-called adoption was up, especially during the Depression. And remember, 50 agencies were sending people over here. That's when those agencies closed their doors and took their files and their bank accounts back to Britain. Cosmo de Klerk, Citizen of the Year in Trenton a couple of years ago. He just died 6 weeks ago. He was a homeboy. He joined up, went overseas, and this is what he had to say.
When I was sent overseas, I went straight to the home to ask about my papers and what happened to the money I didn't receive for 8 years' work. I got $200 delivered to me at Army camp a few weeks later.
That's $200 for 8 years. That's for 96 months, just a bit more than $2 a month. By the way, as I said, he was named Trenton's Citizen of the Year, and they had a soccer field named after him because he introduced that most popular Trentonian sport to the area. Home children were also denied their medical histories. Young Samuel Mundy of 386 St. Antoine Street in Montreal wrote to the home in England.
Please send me information about my parents. If they are dead, I should like to know the cause of death, feeling that the doctors who attend me might better know if there's a chance of my recovery.
And on the very same page that we found his letter, we also found
an obituary for Robert Samuel Mundy, who died 2 years after coming to Canada.
Now, never mind the difference in accent, climate, food, and work habits, etc. Imagine the sheer shock of a child brought up like my father in London, who was sent to the upper reaches of Renfrew County between Brudenell and Rockingham in the winter of 1914.
Dave's dad first started to talk of his past just a year before he died, when he was taken for a car ride through the nearest village to the farm where he was first placed. He sat in the car, shook his head, looked at the tiny train station in Killaloe and said, "And they sent the boy from London to Killaloe in late February. The train got in at 4 a.m. and he had to wait until 8 for the farmer to come and pick him up."
Do you notice how we talked about the boy as if it was an out-of-body experience?
We've often wondered what was going through his mind, the mind of that 15-year-old, as he stood there alone, freezing in the dark.
You know, other children were sent to homes where only French or German or Polish was spoken. That includes Bill Lucy, Vero Deka, many children, Birdie, who could still speak French after all these years. Some children lost their language entirely, their English language. When I was a young child living in Hull, Quebec, we had a newspaper boy come to the door one day and knock on the door and handed us a piece of paper, and it said, "I am your new newspaper boy. I do not speak English. My name is Jean-Jacques McGillicuddy." Listen to two English boys writing to the homes in England from their French homes in Quebec.
"Please excuse the mistakes. I speak more French now than English, and I'm muddled up with the two languages." And the second boy says, "It has commenced to snow here. Please send a picture of my brother Charlie. I have forgot him in the face."
We mentioned Bernardo. He's rightly famous. He did send, as I said earlier, 1 out of every 3 children to Canada, a total of 30,000. But there were other agencies doing the same thing. In some respects, he was the most successful. On the other hand, he wasn't above kidnapping children, changing their name and their religion, shipping them out, and then conveniently losing their file when charged.
Bernardo was charged 85 times before 1889, but never admitted to kidnapping, only philanthropic abduction. And even when found guilty and ordered to return the child, he did not.
He died in 1905. His organization proudly lives on today. 50 years after he died, the name was changed from Dr. Bernardo's to just plain Bernardo's, because that's when the secrecy on his records was, the closure on his records was up. Bernardo's now owns 50% of all the children's records who were sent to Canada, 50,000 records. Sharman's, the Children's Aid Society, the Liverpool Sheltering Homes, Annie McPherson, several other agencies' records are with Bernardo's. So if you are looking for home child's records, do get in touch with us, because Bernardo's is the one agency that requires a very special form, and we have ample numbers of those.
Now, no one has ever done a definitive study of how much money was to be made in child migration, but we do know that agencies cleared $5 for each child at one time. We also know that there were kickback courts in Britain.
And there were, Ontario government paid £2 in the beginning, the £6 in the beginning. The federal government paid £2 for every child brought into the government. So you might say there was a bounty on the children brought in. And this was paid by the Department of Agriculture, because there was no Department of Immigration at that time. Immigration was the responsibility of the Department of Agriculture. So these records are in those particular department records.
Well, David and Kay, your dialogue for the last few minutes is so enlightening, so interesting, and yet so tragic when you think back in the decades gone by what those children had to go through. And today people, they don't even, right in Belleville, there wouldn't be 1 out of 100 people know about the Marchment home. And the funny thing, a little local history, a teacher of mine, who I was a bearer at her death a few years ago, she was 93, her name was Nellie P. Mary, and her father worked at the Bernardo home in Guelph, and she showed me documents to that effect.
And was an in-law, was related to Annie McPherson.
Yes.
That's right, that's right.
It's in the book.
It's too bad that we haven't got more time, but I want to find out that you're doing such worthwhile work in a certain aspect of society that people forget about. Money must be involved. Do you accept donations, or do they go for some helpful reason?
We do what we do at our own expense, not at Heritage Renfrew's expense, at our own expense. But if somebody sends us donations, all those donations go into a special fund, which we have nothing to do with signage and so on. That's looked after by a special committee at Heritage Renfrew. And it is used for very special projects like erecting plaques. We've erected the first plaque in Canada to commemorate home children. The second was put up at Peterborough. We contributed to it. The provincial plaque we were responsible for, which has been erected in Ottawa. And we've had input, but not financially, to the federal plaque, which will be erected sometime this year, we hope, somewhere in Canada. Actually, it's going to be in Ontario. We hope to erect a plaque this summer at Halifax, at Pier 21, where a lot of children came in. We also are working with the Parks Canada whenever we can, when they invite us to, and in promoting the computer pages like this. This is on the internet. This is a page which tells about home children. And so for special projects, we've also spent money to bring children, our home children who were in wheelchairs, to our reunions, because we knew that they wanted to come, and they could only come if they had special care while they were there. So it's
right there. In finishing our program today, you mentioned all types of people that are involved in this, but I think there's no one higher than a former Governor General. You have something there you'd like to read off to me, David, or to our viewing audience?
The home children suffered a great stigma, and we try to erase that stigma by writing to people in high places when we have reunions, and every year we get letters from the Prime Minister. We were denied one from the former Prime Minister, actually, but was Kim, but her office didn't go along with it. Mr. Chrétien's been very good. He sent us 800 letters, personally signed letters, to give to individuals, to home children, and so on. We got one from Princess Diana several years ago. There's a copy of it downstairs. And this is the last one we got from Romeo Leblanc, and it's beautiful. I'd like to finish. It was dated June '99. A country's history is made up of glorious episodes that enrich the collective memory and are related in the history books. It also includes somber, disturbing periods not mentioned in these books, events that give rise to a sort of collective amnesia. Canada is no exception. Some chapters of Canadian history summon forth our national pride. Others, however, make us uncomfortable. We would prefer to simply ignore them. The fate of the 100,000 children that Great Britain sent to Canada between 1869 and the economic crisis of the 1930s is one of these sad episodes, and we are only now beginning to fathom its full sense. We know today that many of these children were exploited, humiliated, and mistreated. After long years of silence, they've begun to talk about their experiences and search for their true origins. They are not demanding justice and are not motivated by resentment. They simply wish to heal their wounds and raise others' awareness of what they went through. We should not forget the debt that we owe these people, for they and their descendants contributed to the growth of our country. One of them said he was now proud to be a home child, but was prouder still to be a Canadian. Home Children Canada is playing a leading role in helping the survivors and their descendants regain ownership of their past, and I congratulate this association for the marvelous work that it's doing. It goes on to wish everybody who was attending the reunions the very best.
Very moving letter from
Very moving.
Former Governor General. Well, our time has come to an end, and I want to thank David Lorente and his wife Kay for coming all the way from Renfrew.
The fruit.
To be with us today, and I hope that it won't be too far distant in the future, that you'll come back again, and congratulations and on your worthwhile work in regards the migrants, we call it the home children. So we're going to say goodbye, and how can I sign off? Oh, with the same old question. What's in a name? I'm Eugene Lang.